Hello, and in this video, we are going to be reviewing the content for week 2 for our course, which is all on environmental exposures. So here are the objectives for this week that are also listed on your Brightspace page. At the end of this video, we are going to review the field log together, which is part of your weekly objectives. So environmental exposures were touched on in our previous chapter from week 1, and historically these are things in the environment that can be toxic to humans, and historically some of the big ones have been lead, mercury, thalidomide, and different types of gases. And our exposure through ingestion, inhalation, skin contact, and placental transfer can have negative effects on our bodies, especially when pregnant women are exposed during the first or second trimesters. This can impact things in the fetus, like their cells migrating and developing and working, how their body is differentiated, and anything that's happening through this placental transfer between the mother and the baby. Environmental exposures to toxins does not cause physical effects after birth, but it can significantly affect postnatal brain development, okay? So we're going to go through some of the most common environmental exposures and some specific things that come about from those. Lead poisoning, I'm sure, is something that you have heard of. Lead is a material that can be found in our pipes, in batteries, things like weights, bullets, paints, dyes, and it used to be a lot more common in the past, but there's been a lot of laws and regulations banning the use of lead. Children are most commonly exposed to lead if they eat foods or water that is contaminated with lead, or they ingest or inhale dust particles or paint chips. Young children are at a higher risk for lead poisoning because they are putting things in their mouth more than adults are, mouthing things. They are also putting their hands in their mouth more frequently. Lead poisoning can lead to things like anemia, kidney damage, and brain impairments. You can have a low level of lead poisoning, which can cause cognitive impairments, memory issues, ADHD, and learning difficulties. And the lead interferes with the pruning and myelination of your brain. No amount of lead exposure is safe, especially for children. There is a type of therapy, chelination therapy, but it does not reverse existing neurocognitive defects. So if a child has lead poisoning and they already have some brain cognitive impairments or memory issues, they can do this therapy. And the therapy, it works on removing the lead from the body, but the therapy cannot reverse anything that is already, any deficits that have already occurred. It can only help moving forward. Tobacco smoke is another environmental exposure, and nicotine can cross the placenta into fetal circulation, into the fetal blood. So when a fetus is exposed to tobacco smoke or nicotine, that can affect the cell proliferation, differentiation, and that activity in the brain that is happening through synapses. It can cause low birth weight, preterm births or an early birth, a risk of obesity, hypertension, high blood pressure, asthma, and impaired lung function. Maternal smoking can affect a baby's brain development and vision. This is why it's very important that pregnant people do not smoke or be around people who are smoking. Postnatal exposure, when a child is born, is referred to as secondhand smoke. So if you are around someone who is smoking, and this can increase the risk of SIDS, which is sudden infant death syndrome, neurodevelopmental and behavioral disorders, conduct disorder, intellectual disability, sleep disruption, and respiratory disorders, because tobacco smoke and nicotine can interfere with the workings of the brain. That's where we're seeing those brain and behavior issues coming from. Mercury is another environmental toxin. This is released into the environment from rocks, from burning fossil fuels, and burning things that contain mercury, like batteries, light bulbs, and thermometers. A form of mercury called methylmercury can cross the placental barrier very easily. This is also the element that's found in fish. It can cause severe brain damage, microcephaly, which is having a small head, seizures, cerebral palsy, and cognitive impairments. Low levels of exposure can cause decrements in IQ, so a lowered IQ, deficiencies in visual spacing and processing, memory, attention, and language. Now, research has told us that the benefits of eating fish outweigh risk of toxicity, but children and pregnant women should avoid fish with higher levels of mercury. This is why when a person is pregnant, they are advised to not eat a lot of fish. Some fish is okay, but not a lot of fish, and especially not a lot of fish that is high in mercury. Ethyl mercury is a form of mercury that's a preservative in multi-dose vials of some vaccine. In our textbook in this chapter, you'll read about the research that came out of the claim that this caused autism, but there's no evidence that this in vaccines is linked to autism. And that all routine vaccines for infants in the U.S. are available as thimerosal-free or at the lowest rate acceptable. And children with delayed immunizations showed no benefits of delaying immunizations in the first year. Alcohol is another toxic to fetus and baby's development. This consumption of alcohol when you're pregnant can cause fetal alcohol spectrum disorder or fetal alcohol syndrome. And this can cause atypical facial features. This image shows what those facial features, how they can be affected, such as having a low nose bridge, having a flat mid face. The most prominent that you would notice is having a smooth philtrum, which is that part of skin connecting your nose to your lips, or your cupid's bow, having a thin upper lip. It can also cause small heads, short stature, attention memory difficulties, executive functioning impairments, which include things like an intellectual disability, speech and language issues, learning disabilities, and vision or hearing problems. No amount of alcohol is safe during pregnancy. Prenatal exposure interferes with that neural migration, brain organization, brain growth, and synaptic formation. So alcohol can affect with all of that brain development. Marijuana and opioids cross the placenta barrier, and it can be present in breast milk of pregnant and breastfeeding mothers. So doctors should screen for, if they are concerned, any marijuana exposure and associated risk factors. And providing education to families is extremely important in preventing these issues that can come about from environmental toxins. Children that are born to mothers with an opioid or a polysubstance use during pregnancy have lower levels of functioning, lower levels of cognitive functioning, lower birth weight, and decreased brain volumes compared to non-drug exposed babies. And after birth, that baby will suffer from a withdrawal if a pregnant woman was using opioids or polysubstances during their pregnancy. Pesticides can be present in our food, our air, our dust, our soil, surfaces, and water sources. They do cross the placental barrier and can be present in breast milk. So one category is organophosphate pesticides. These are neurotoxicants, especially for children. When they are exposed, it can be associated with a decreased IQ and social emotional responsiveness, developmental delays, and autistic behaviors. High dose exposures to pesticides can lead to systematic health problems, including permanent damage to major organ systems and even possible death. Low levels of chronic exposure can lead to adverse neurodevelopmental and health outcomes. In childhood, exposures are associated with cognitive impairments, ADHD, childhood cancers, and respiratory issues. This is a really cool chart on the routes of exposure where these pesticides may come from and what they destroy, our genes, our enzymes, our cellular levels, and our metabolic systems, and how they can affect us in different ways. PCBs are a group of industrial chemicals that are banned in the United States. Ingestion of these are associated with a risk of cancer, reduced immunity, decreased birth weight, and endocrine disruptions. Low-level prenatal or postnatal exposure has been associated with cognitive delays, behavioral disorders, attention problems, impulsive behaviors, obesity, and autistic behaviors. Endocrine disruptors are chemicals that interfere with the function of our endocrine system. So those are listed here. Ones that you've probably heard about is BPA, and these can leach out of products that these chemicals are in and be ingested. They can cross the placental barrier and influence the neurodevelopment of fetus. They can disrupt the signaling pathways of lipid metabolism and alter serum gonadal hormones, leading to sex-specific effects on developing fetuses. Prenatal exposure is associated with cognitive impairments, including lower IQ, inattention, hyperactivity, and poor social communication. We talked about congenital infections in our previous week. The abbreviation for these infections is TORCH, which stands for toxoplasmosis, other, which includes syphilis, varicella zoster, parvovirus, and B19, rubella, cytomegalovirus, and herpes. These infections under TORCH account for 2 to 3 of congenital anomalies. One you've probably heard of, infection you've probably heard of is Zika virus. This is a virus that is transmitted to the fetus that can lead to a broad spectrum of neurological impairments, growth restrictions, and fetal loss. Some of these things that might happen is having a smaller head, having extra skin on your scalp, club feet, an increase in muscle tone, atypical brain activity, having seizures and eye impairments. Long-term studies show that there's a significant delay in cognitive skills, motor skills, communication skills, and increased incidences of cerebral palsy. So this is why pregnant women are not, it is not okay for them to travel outside of the states. Well, they can travel outside of the states, but going to other areas where Zika virus is common is generally not suggested when you are pregnant, because if you get a virus, your baby will also get the virus when you are pregnant. We touched briefly on epigenetics in our previous week, but epigenetics is the study of heritable changes in the gene expression that occur without changes to the DNA sequence. So this is a mechanism by which genes can be switched on or off by chemical signals like a dimmer on a light switch. So think about something is happening to us that's not necessarily our DNA sequence changing. Maybe it's an environmental toxin that we are ingesting, and our switch is getting dimmed on, which is turning on some of these changes happening in our body. Some examples of this are lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's. These are all diseases that affect people through epigenetic changes. Environmental toxins can induce these, especially mother smoking, fetal exposure to alcohol. This alternates the genes themselves, and any prenatal exposure to arsenic. There's a huge cost on our society when there are environmental toxins in our world. The societal cost is most commonly measured as the disability adjusted life years and monetary burden to the economy, as economic productivity losses. If we have people in our society that are affected negatively by a toxin that maybe we are using as a pesticide, that's going to have a burden on our society. The Toxic Substance Control from 1976 required that there's reporting, record-keeping, testing requirements, and restrictions relating to chemical substances or mixtures. And then in 2016, the Frank R. Lautenberg Chemical Safety Act prioritizes safety and risk evaluation of the existing chemicals under the previous act and required affirmative findings on safety of any new chemicals before they are introduced into the market. In summary, there are more than 1,000 chemicals identified as neurotoxins based on human and animal studies. Chemical toxins have different effects on the human body depending on timing and dose. Long-term neurodevelopmental adverse outcomes have been associated with in utero as well as postnatal exposure to multiple chemicals. Damage to the central nervous system from environmental toxins can persist for years and is often irreversible. Mechanics of action like epigenetic modifications are being identified that can aid in the evaluation for safety of neurotoxicants. And because of this irreversible nature of damage observed in the central nervous system due to environmental toxins, doctors and practitioners should focus on prevention of exposure. So now that we've touched on chapter 2, let's hop over to our Brightspace page. So in week 2, you'll see that you'll be reading chapter 2, you'll be watching this content video. You have a couple of videos on different types of environmental exposures that we touched on. You'll have one on fetal alcohol syndrome, lead poisoning, and thalidomide survivors. You will take the week 2 reading quiz. You will complete the week 2 discussion. And now we're going to talk about our field log and field experience handbook together now. So in our Brightspace page, under the field experience, you will find that there's a field experience handbook video. This video walks through the field experience handbook. You must review this video. It is a requirement for any course that has a field experience requirement. The handbook is linked here, as well as the pre-service teacher permit information. If you are needing I had sent this out in an email over the summer. If you are needing this information, it's here for you if you needed a copy of it. Now, your field log has a drop box here. And then you have 2 templates that you can work from. So there's a Google Docs link and there's a Word link. So whichever one you would prefer to use, you would go to whichever one you want and click open the link. And your field log directions is that when you will complete 10 hours of your field experience for our course, you must keep a log of your time. This is an assignment for our course. You can use the template below or you may create your own. However, you must include the following for each time you enter the classroom: the date, the time, a summary, and then a takeaway or a memorable moment from the field. When you have completed your 10 required field hours and your log, you must have your cooperating teacher sign and date verifying your hours. So you would need to print this off. Your summary and your takeaway or memorable moment can be concise bullet points. You don't need to write multiple sentences. Your log should just be a quick summary of your time in the field. This field log is due on the last day that we can accept work for our course this semester, which is Friday, December 11th. This is an example of me. I have the information listed up here: my name, the semester, location of my field hours, my cooperating teacher, and then I have the date, the time, the total time that I was there, and then what I did, and then a takeaway or memorable moment. So here's an example of a blank copy. You can make a copy of this for yourself. You can just print this off as is and then fill it in as the semester goes on. When you've finished your 10 hours, you will hand this piece of paper to your cooperating teacher and they will write their name, they will sign, and they will date. If you would like to make a copy on a Google Doc and you might not know how to do that, you would go to File, Make a Copy, and it would make a copy of this document that belongs to you and belongs to your Google Drive. You can do the same thing with a Word link, but you would go to File and then it's called Create a Copy. So your field log is attached to your field hours. If you have any questions about this or any concerns about this, please reach out to me. You also need to make sure that you complete your field interest survey, which is linked in week 1. This is due on September 2nd, which is Wednesday of this mid-week 2. Once you have completed your placement survey, I will work on getting you placed into a field experience position. You also need to send me a copy of your BCI, your FBI, and your pre-service permit. You can send these as a picture or a PDF through email. And I must have a copy of these before I can send you your field experience. If you have any questions about your field log, if you have any questions about week 2 content, please reach out to me.